name is Luther C. Brock Sr. I was born in San Francisco, California, Fillmore District. David was and became a good friend of mine. I knew David a couple of decades ago. We were basically here in East Palo Alto, and we were in the life together.
What did he look like when you first saw him?
Same way he looked like always. Tall, dark, always had some type of a mustache or goatee or Fu Manchu. And stayed away from the crowd. We were both standing away from the people who were around, and so we noticed each other. I'd say David Lewis was a community activist who came back to the community that he thought he helped destroy and rebuilt it. In '89, there was an earthquake, the Loma Prieta earthquake, and he was in a cell in San Quentin. And they had us come out, and they were expecting aftershocks, and we refused to go back in. And they brought in the police dogs or the hoses and things. And I saw him after that in the yard, and he told me, he said, I'm not going back. Not like that. I think he'll be remembered for the thousands of lives that he ushered into recovery, as long as that's what they wanted to do. One thing I remember about David is we had a saying about going to the bus stop with somebody, which means we would go all the way. But actually, David would go to the bus stop, get on the bus, and ride to the end of the line with them. And that was different. There are only a few individuals that do things like that. Gordy Graham, a friend of both of ours, told me and David one time, and some other friends of ours, he said, eagles don't flock. So while we would see each other quite a bit, he brought me in to co-found an organization, Free at Last, along with him. We wouldn't see each other as much as we liked, and so we would just call each other from across the country, other countries, or wherever, but we definitely stayed in touch. We joked around, kidded around, and he loved a good joke. And he didn't like to tell stories. He would tell a parable, and many people didn't know what it was until the end, and it would usually be something profound. He could interact with the person that was in the bushes shooting dope, or with the president. And he could come into a room, basically, and there could be 1,000 people there, and he would be talking to the crowd, and you would think he was speaking to you. It was like he had an angel on his shoulder, and that angel allowed him to do the work of Allah, or God. David was a Muslim. He was very proud of his faith, but David was a man of all faiths. I think David met the addict where he was. He was non-judgmental, which allowed the person to let them in. Many times they feel that people who get clean are putting themselves on a pedestal, and he never did that. We've had some wonderful times together. We were on BET together on the Tavis Smiley Show. And I remember after the Tavis Smiley Show, Tavis came up and saw us in our rooms, and he was with some people. And David told me, well, we'll check you when we get back. And I told David, where are we going? We went right out to the street, to the stroll with the addicts, and started talking to them about what was happening on the streets of Washington, D.C. and the things that they needed. And he was so very comfortable in those types of places. And he was responsible for millions of dollars coming to the communities. I watched him go from local to national to international. And many times people have an agenda, and they knew within 30 seconds there was no agenda. Whatever happened, it was going to be okay. David had a type of character where he searched for crisis. He was very comfortable with people who are in crisis, and when he wasn't in that, and he was with his friends from the Circle Recovery or basically just talking to me on the phone, I never asked him how things went. I always knew what he had just came from. And his health had suffered. He had Bell's palsy, something's happened with his leg, and things like that, but he was a non-complainer. His character was, if you give something to somebody, don't expect it back. If you get it back, fine. If not, okay. If you're going to tell somebody something, keep that word. You don't have to tell anybody anything that you don't want. And basically, almost, they had a strip that came out, and a key thing you put around you, and I think they could have put WWAD. what would Allah do? And that's the way he did it. Or what would Jesus do? And he strove for that. We actually made a decision to go to Africa from some doctors that worked there, that were doing working with the individuals who had AIDS, and that's actually the field that David worked in HIV and AIDS. Although much of his life was spent around people in recovery, but when the life-threatening disease came about and transferred from the gay man to the IV drug users, then quite naturally, you had to take up that flag. And we talked about it, and I was able to get there before David. And he questioned me many times about things that were happening in Africa. And I didn't realize it at the time. While my work was specifically with individuals who had HIV in Africa, David was contemplating how the substance abuser was doing who had HIV. And so when he went, his focus was even more so than mine. It was on the substance abuser who had HIV, which brought him all the way back to the community. So he went full circle. David was a visionary, and by many of his visions having came true, he would talk to people about ways that he thought. And one thing he could do real good also, he could delegate. A lot of people want the fame for themselves, and David was willing to share that with individuals and say, well, how about if you do this? Or do you know so and so? Or you know what? I'll make sure you do know him. Or things like that. And so he was always trying to work out something, and I don't know anything he started that did not happen. There are places that he went in the quest of helping the addict and the individual that had HIV, that people, when they get clean, just don't go. And it was all right. Everybody knew him. He's someone I saw on the mountaintop. He was a giant amongst men. I miss my friend.